Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Saints Insider Podcast. Today is Wednesday, January the 29th. I'm Zach Ewing with Rod Walker, Matthew Paris, and Jeff Duncan. They are part of our illustrious Times-Picayune Saints coverage team. And it's been a busy couple of weeks. Not going to lie, we got the Super Bowl coming up. We'll have more news about that at the end of the show. This podcast is going to kind of sort of become a Super Bowl podcast next week. But in the meantime, the Saints are still searching for a head coach. They're the only team still searching for a head coach. They were one of the first teams to be searching for a head coach. And it's kind of become the theory that nobody wants this job. Now, whether that's correct or not, I don't know. But we will discuss that today. We do have a favorite for the Saints head coach. At this point, that seems to be Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. We have a lot of candidates who have kind of removed themselves from consideration. It's hard to tell in these situations, Jeff, whether that was the Saints, the Saints wanting that guy and the guy saying, no, I don't want this job because of salary cap, because of aging roster or whatever reasons we have discussed, or whether that's because they found out the Saints probably weren't going to offer them the job and they're kind of sort of saving face.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know which one's the real truth. And certainly the Saints are going to frame this as they're just going through the process. This is the process we were going to adhere to all along, and we got our man. You're going to hear that no matter what, but it's hard to really know if someone actually was their other target that turned them down. And I don't think we're going to know that for sure ever.
Yeah, I mean, no matter who they hire, and it looks like it's going to be Kellen Moore, who we'll talk about more, but Matt, no matter who they hire, they're going to get up there and say, this is the guy we targeted from the beginning, yada, yada, yada. I mean, that is going to be the comment. I don't know if I buy that, though. I mean, when we talked about candidates, when this started in earnest a month ago, or say 3-4 weeks ago, Kellen Moore was like the seventh name we mentioned. He was mentioned, but it's hard for me to believe that he was the top choice.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly appears that way. I will say the Saints don't always do things conventional, so what seems like the conventional choice to everyone else might not have been theirs. Kellen Moore might have emerged early in the process for them with the strong virtual interview. You don't necessarily know how these things go, but it is hard to say, like, let's use Mike McCarthy for example. Mike McCarthy pulled out of the Saints coaching search yesterday to focus his attention on 2026. Now, did he pull out because he knew Moore was going to get the job? Maybe, but Aaron Glenn chose the Jets. Joe Brady decided to stay. Kliff Kingsbury said, I'm good. Like, it's hard to say that when there's more than one person happening.
Right.
Like, it's rare for coaching searches or coaching candidates to pull out of the process as it is. But when four of them do it, I don't know.
Especially when it's like coaches who have never been head coaches. I mean, everybody, like right. Mickey said, I mean, there are only 32 of these jobs, and when they come available, you kind of think that most of these young assistants want to kind of seize the opportunity, but for whatever reason, they back there.
Good point is, why would you even be in the search to begin with?
Right.
I mean, you don't go into the search to even start if you're not interested in it. So I think to Matt's point of like four different people, if you're Mike McCarthy, you would not have even shown interest in him. He's making money.
Right.
And he's made a ton of money. He could just have said, no, I'm going to sit out a year and get into the coaching search a year from now. So, yeah, there's definitely definitely a red flag, I would say.
And a lot of times people will at least come and interview, like actually do the interview, and to not even do it just kind of makes you.
Yeah, and McCarthy is one thing. McCarthy never did interview, right? He never actually came and interviewed, but we have it on our reporting and on some other national reporting that Mike McCarthy and the Saints did at least have contact. They talked about it. I mean, there was some mutual interest at some point that fell apart. But I look more at like a Joe Brady, who took an initial virtual interview. Now, Kliff Kingsbury, who also withdrew from consideration, he said pretty clearly from the beginning of the postseason, like, hey, I think I'm going to stay here another year. I mean, that was always his refrain from the beginning. Joe Brady took a virtual interview. I think he took more than one, right? He interviewed with Jacksonville as well, virtually. Then he came back and said, okay, I'm not interested in a head coaching job this offseason. I'm staying in Buffalo. If if he felt that way from the beginning, why did he take a virtual interview with the Saints? Then he talks to the Saints. The Jaguars hire Liam Cohen, and now he's just sort of, okay, I'm good. I mean, again, we don't know exactly what the truth is in all these, but I think it's fair to say, guys, that it doesn't look good for the Saints. I mean, it does not look like this was the most desirable job by any stretch of the imagination.
It doesn't, and it's okay for a guy to get their feet wet. Like you look at Ben Johnson, he went through that 2 years in a row before he ended up taking coaching job this year with the Bears. So maybe Brady wanted that experience of what it was like to interview, to put feelers out and get his name started to circulate. That's how this process starts. But yeah, if you're Joe Brady and you're looking at the Saints, I could stick with Josh Allen another year, probably post similar numbers, and be a hot commodity again next offseason, whereas anyone who's stepping into the Saints job is going to have their challenges.
Yeah, he's following the Ben Johnson kind of
These
game
guys
plan.
are picking their spot, and this is not the spot they want to pick.
And getting your name out there, like Matt said, that's important too. That I think that's what their agents are advising them. Get your name in the mix, let people see, and then we pull out. We're in control here.
But going back to your original point about Kellen Moore, I mean, he was pretty low on. I don't think any of us had him in our top 5 even. I think the fact that they have made it to the Super Bowl makes it a little better. I mean, you kind of say, okay, I can, because I think fans are kind of like starting to jump on board a little bit. But if this team doesn't make it to the Super Bowl, I don't know what fans would think about this Kellen Moore hire. So if they hire him,
Yeah, I mean, even a week ago, we had a podcast where we said it's going to be McCarthy or Joe Brady, and if not one of them, then Darren Rizzi has a chance. I mean, we weren't even talking Kellen Moore a week ago. Now,
But that's also why, look,
maybe that's our
a week or
blind
two
spot.
ago, I said we don't need to focus because we were jumping the gun.
I mean, maybe that's our blind spot, right? Maybe they were talking to Kellen Moore the whole time. But I also think there's some where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's a lot of smoke with these guys saying, this is not the situation for me.
Yeah, but here's the other thing. I mean, Sean Payton interviewed here in 2006. I mean, the Cowboys hadn't, they didn't make the Super Bowl that year. And I mean, I know he interviewed and turned down basically the Raiders job a year ahead of time. So he had some name recognition to some degree, but he wasn't any more pedigreed than Kellen Moore. And, that turned out okay. And now that might be lightning in a bottle. We'll see. But, we'll see how it plays out. I think sometimes we all jump to conclusions on people. If you read about Kellen Moore, there's some interesting things I think about him as a candidate.
No, and I was pretty interested in him in the sense that because he was Ben Johnson once upon a time, like 5 years ago, he was the hot up and coming coordinator who was gonna like the architect of all these brilliant schemes, and his star has kind of cooled off, but I think he's still a smart coach, and it'll be interesting. I was listening to Dan Orlovsky give an interview the other day, and he said that like Moore, at least as a player, wasn't necessarily the type, the command the room type. And so you look at the Saints, think about their problems. That is something players have said, like, we need a guy who does that. I'm interested to see that, Orlovsky hasn't been with Moore in the last couple of years, but I'm interested to see that part of it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a quality they have to have in this head coach because of their unique, organization. No, I'm not doing that.
I was waiting for it.
No, I'm just saying.
I thought you were going to say
it's
the
important.
word.
But look, I'm also coming around to like, hey, is Kevin O'Connell really a command the room kind of guy? And he's a great head coach.
He's he's not command the room in the sense of like he's a jerk, but he's command the room in the sense that he's like
Enthusiastic.
yes, charming.
And I don't know. None of us know Kellen Moore, but this is all a good transition into I think what we're going to spend some time on after the break, and that's kind of talking about Kellen Moore and why he is an intriguing candidate. And to your point, Jeff, why he could work here. Just because he's not the Saints' first choice, or we don't think he was their first choice, doesn't mean it won't work. And Rod, you wrote a column about that, I think, over the weekend. That like we don't know. We don't know if Darren Rizzi would be a great head coach. We don't know if Mike Kafka would be a great head coach. We're guessing. None of these guys have been a head coach before, so we're guessing.
Yeah, and none of these guys are stepping into like the greatest situations. So, I mean, they probably are going to have some struggles, but yeah, we just don't know. We don't know who's going to be good and who's not going to be good.
So we'll start talking some of the finer points of Kellen Moore as head coach, if that is the way this is going to go after the break. First, want to let you know that Saints Insider is sponsored by Bank Plus. Their banking decisions are actually made here in New Orleans by local bankers who know the community and take the time to know you. From small business to big business, home loans to bank anywhere technology, Bank Plus is here for New Orleans. Learn more at bankplus.net. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Take a break and be back on the Saints Insider right after this.
Ooh, I see at least 3 of them in there.
3 what?
Possums, big rats, I don't know.
Clarify big.
You're gonna have to gut it.
How much is that gonna cost? Maybe I should just move.
Maybe.
Is that your van?
Hi, strawberry mango. Mm-hmm. Here you go. Thank you. I'll take another one.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Welcome back to the Saints Insider. Moving our discussion on to Kellen Moore, who at this point appears, we're going to call him the favorite. I don't know how solid of a favorite it is, because here's the situation, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but because he is coaching on a Super Bowl team for the Philadelphia Eagles, Matt, he cannot be announced. There cannot be an agreement. There can't be anything finalized until after the Eagles are done playing in the Super Bowl. So favorite is as strong of a word as we're going to get over the next week and a half.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the NFL changed its rules because of a few years ago, Jonathan Gannon was in this exact situation
For the Eagles.
for the Eagles, but he was with the Arizona Cardinals. And then the NFL came down pretty hard on the Cardinals for tampering with Gannon during that kind of no contact period. And so the Eagles lost that Super Bowl, and a lot of fans are mad at Gannon because they felt like he didn't focus necessarily on the game. I don't know if that's fair to him, but he'll be, I'm sure when Kellen Moore meets here with the press, he'll have his answers down of trying to avoid the questions as much as possible, because there's only so much you could do. But I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to anyone if it's all right, February 10th, day after the Super Bowl, Saints announce they've hired Kellen Moore.
Yeah. I that's the hard part for me, Rod, is like you can't come to an agreement with him, but does that mean you can, wink and shake hands, or does that mean you can talk to his agent and say, blink twice if we have a deal? Like you can put all these rules in place, but there's always ways around them.
Yeah, and I just think at this point, I mean, we're like so close to. I just think at this point, I think the Saints, they have to know who their number one guy is at this point. And I always go back to Darren Rizzi, like he's just kind of been in limbo this whole time. So I just think I think they probably know right now who the guy is, and if it is, they probably had a behind-the-scenes agreement and know that if he's their guy, I think he knows they're their guy. And you talked about him being the favorite. I've been doing like these little polls on Twitter every time a coach drops out, and started out, I think AG was the favorite, and then he got out, and then it was kind of McCarthy and Joe Brady were kind of, both like right there together. But I did one yesterday, and Kellen Moore has jumped up to like 74% of the votes. Like he's by far like head and shoulders above everybody else, and it's like him, and then Darren Rizzi, and then Weaver and Kafka are kind of down at the bottom with like 4% each. But Kellen Moore has definitely jumped to the front of the fan. He's
front of the line, and it's easy to fall in love with Kellen Moore, right? Like you saw the NFC Championship game on Sunday; they put up 55 points. They scored 6 rushing touchdowns, seven rushing touchdowns. Yeah, and his offenses in the past, Matt, the Cowboys had the number 1 offense in the NFL in total yardage in 2019 and in 2021. The other 2 years he was coordinator in 20 and 22, they were top 10. His one kind of blip on his radar is that 2023 Chargers. He ran their offense, and they were like middle of the pack. They were 16th, 17th. But Justin Herbert missed, I think, 5 games in the better part of another one. So, like, he has run some great offenses. He's had teams that were top 2 in the NFL in passing. He's had teams that were top 2 in the NFL in rushing, like this year. I mean, he has run some exciting offenses.
Yeah, I think to his credit, he's taken advantage of the players he's had at his disposal. He's had some great players, but he's made the identity of those teams around them. Like you look at Saquon Barkley this year. It's also, I think it's interesting that he's had to work with Nick Sirianni this year, and even Mike McCarthy in Dallas. Those are both very strong-willed offensive coaches who have their own ideas of how things should be run. I'm sure they're having, they're coming up to him and saying, like, we should run this. Like, if you guys remember in the Eagles game, they ran that really weird, the Eagles-Saints game from earlier this year, they ran that really weird, like, instead of a tush push on 4th and 1, they, like, tried to sneak it outside to Barkley. Sirianni said after the game that was his call. And so it created all these sorts of questions like, whoa, is Kellen Moore really calling these plays? And they said that it was collaborative and that, Sirianni gives his input. So I think it's to Moore's, like, credit that he's been able to work with all sorts of different coaches, different sorts of players, and still come up with these productive offenses.
Yeah, my question with him has anything to do with his ability to run an offense. It's can he be a head coach? I mean,
right.
Sure.
Dennis Allen's a great defensive coordinator, and we all agree on that. But taking that step to being a head coach has proven difficult, not just for him, but all kinds of assistant coaches in the league. So that's the question. And I think there's a little bit of a red flag for me just in the way Dallas handled him. They didn't really go out of their way to protect him from leaving the way they did Dan Quinn. And they had both those guys in the building when they were both head coaching candidates. And the fact that they didn't really go after him in this cycle. They went after Brian Schottenheimer, yet they knew Kellen Moore well. So those are just, look, not like the Cowboys, the most functional organization in the world either, but it's a little bit of a red flag for me.
Are you going to talk about your T-shirt idea now?
No.
We won't go there.
Oh, God.
Jerry Jones, man.
I can't believe you brought that up.
Oh. Jerry Jones. No, well,
I put it on Twitter if they want to know.
Yeah.
I replied to a.
Okay, so search Rod's Twitter. So it's out in the public space, all right? Anyway, yeah, the Cowboys are a mess, too. They hired Brian Schottenheimer, who also had not been interviewed by anybody else. That's the downside, though, with Kellen Moore, right? It's just an experience thing. He's 36 years old. Would he be the youngest coach in the NFL?
Yeah, he'd be the youngest coach.
Mike McDonald right now is the youngest coach in Seattle.
He's a year younger than Mike.
So he's a year young. So he'd be the youngest coach in the NFL. I don't know that he's ever really. He's interviewed for head coaching positions, but I don't know that he's ever been a finalist before. If you won't say it, I'll say it. He's not what you would think of as an alpha, right? So I think there's some serious concerns here, Rod.
Yeah, I mean, you look at McVay. He was 30 when he got that job. So it can be done, but Kellen Moore is only 6 months older than Mario Davis, which is just kind of baffling.
He played Derek Carr in college. They played against each other. Yeah,
and
kicked his butt.
And this is a team with. You look at some of these veteran guys. All they know is basically like what Sean Payton. They had Sean Payton, DA, and Rizzi. Those are all from the same tree. So I am curious to see how any newcomer is going to come in if they don't hire Rizzi. How these players adjust to somebody new because they just haven't had it before. The younger guys will be fine, but guys like Cam and Kamara, older guys are usually kind of set in their ways, and by nature, people don't like change. So I'll be curious to see how people respond to any of these guys that are outsiders.
We talked about this too, and this is going to be our transaction segment. Is sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and help support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. But obviously, Kellen, who did I kill? Who did I kill?
I don't know.
For those listening, I just hit the shelf and knocked one of our Saints memorabilia off.
God!
Killed Bobby. Jeez. All right. I killed Bobby Ader. Yeah, so now I lost my train of thought. But Kellen Moore's obviously coaching in the Super Bowl, right? He's going to be very busy this week developing a game plan to attack the Kansas City Chiefs, trying to prevent the three-peat. It could be a career accomplishment for him no matter what else happens. So if he is the guy and he's thinking about this, he can't be announced until next week. The timeline is all very delayed here to where he can't be the coach, named the coach until like Monday or Tuesday after the Super Bowl. Then he's got to hire staff. We don't know who he knows. His brother, Kirby Moore, is the offensive coordinator at Missouri. So that's a possibility. Maybe he has some personal connections. But like this, that's a problem too. He's got to hire staff.
Yeah, no, he does. And it'll be interesting. Okay, I'm going to hit the bell. Ron Rivera would always make this point in Washington, is that in his first coaching job with the Panthers, one of his first errors was that he didn't have a former head coach on staff to lean on. And so if you're Kellen Moore, like maybe you keep Darren Rizzi around because he's that experienced voice. But I think it would benefit him if he picks someone like Rivera to be his defensive coordinator or something like that. Like you kind of need that voice in the room who's been there, who's helped you. And that's not just a Rivera thing. That's a pretty common thing across the league. But I do wonder if, maybe he'll choose some guy who hasn't necessarily been in the league for a minute and then kind of do that. I don't know who he knows, but something like that. Like
Brendan Staley?
yeah, Brendan Staley. I mean, Jason Garrett, if he has any interest in
coming back
to the league, like, names like that have been there and could help guide him through, because he is young.
And look, I would say if there is a handshake agreement right now, or if I guarantee you through back channels he's reached out to coaches. I mean, there's no doubt. It just, hey, just be ready. I'm going to make a move. I mean, that's not going to distract you from the task at hand of trying to win a Super Bowl, making a few texts to people that you have always had on your list. I mean, I don't think that's a big deal, but he has to have done some of that homework if he in fact knows he's the guy.
I don't think the Saints would even hire him if he hadn't already. I mean, I think that's part of what
that comes up in an interview.
That's in the interview.
Yeah, that's part of the interview.
Sure.
So I'm sure he's pretty far along on that if he's in fact the case. I just think it's interesting is, we didn't talk about this earlier, but like, for Derek Carr, this would be another offense. He's got to learn a whole new, system. It'd be 5 years in a row for him. I mean, the one thing is he's experienced doing it, but nevertheless, that's never a good thing.
There's all sorts of fun podcasts we could have if and when Kellen Moore is hired. Like, would he draft a certain Boise State player in the top 10 of the draft or push for that? I don't know. Talking about Ashton Genty, but
he was in New Orleans the other night at the Pelicans game, by the way.
Was he? Oh.
And I don't know why he was here.
Sound the alarm. Something's going on here.
Pre-draft visit.
No, there's all sorts of ways we could go with it, and I do think it's interesting. If you were Darren Rizzi, would you stick around? I mean, after kind of being publicly turned down again for this job, I don't know. Probably will have other options.
He's going to have options for sure.
Sean Payton.
I mean, I think Denver's looking for a coordinator.
They are.
So
I think they fired their coach so they could they fired their coach coordinator to.
Somebody hired the Jets special teams coordinator. So I know the Jets have an opening. And I was thinking it was Denver that may have hired.
Oh, maybe they did.
But the Jets have. All I know is the Jets.
Maybe so. Maybe we'll check that during the break.
So AG, they coach together too. He and AG.
But that's I mean, if you're Darren Rizzi, you've got options. Obviously, I don't know if Denver's still open, but they could just be waiting to make sure he doesn't get the head coaching job here, and then they have a handshake agreement. I mean, all these things go through back channels, and we don't know. But the point is, if it is Kellen Moore, we're like still probably close to 2 weeks away from an introductory press conference and all of that sort of stuff. And so the Saints, who had the second open job behind the Jets and have already had the last open job for almost a week now, it's going to continue.
That's how they operate, man. That's what they did with – look how long it took them to hire Clint Kubiak last year.
Well, they had to wait for the Super Bowl to finish.
Yeah. I mean, it took forever. So that's just how they operate. That's how Mickey Loomis – for better or worse, Mickey Loomis, the one thing I'd say about him that I actually really like is – he doesn't respond to public pressure, or he's never operated that way. I mean, fans can go off all they want about it. He's just going to do what he thinks is best. He's always worked that way. And so whenever I always hear fans get on us like, you need to, I'm like, you think he's going to, that's not going to work with him. So he doesn't, he wants to get the right person, which is the right way to approach this, and they want to be thorough with it. Now, we'll see if it pans out.
I mean, the Saints are last, but it's not like I don't feel like they're like behind. Like, I mean, they'll be okay.
No,
The Commanders were last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, look how that played out.
it would be hiring coaches, but again, he's probably got that set up. So that's the timeline we're looking at. Saints fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. If you're looking to join a team dedicated to supporting independent grocers, apply today. Your future starts here. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll wrap things up with a look at any other possibilities that may be out there for the Saints right after this. Okay, welcome back. Just checked this during the break. It was the 49ers who hired the Jets special teams coach. So the Broncos indeed do have an opening. And that transitions us into our last segment today, and that is, okay, it all certainly looks like Kellen Moore is the favorite, but again, that can't be announced until after the Super Bowl. Is there any other possibility there's a loose string here and the Saints actually haven't come to an agreement with Moore and that a Darren Rizzi or a Mike Kafka or an Anthony Weaver is still in the running? Do you see that at all, Matt?
I mean, doesn't seem like it, but just a week ago we talked about how McCarthy was the favorite. So, our bet on that.
We're keeping leaving some wiggle room in there.
I think it could be possible. I mean, apparently Anthony Weaver made a strong impression. Darren Rizzi, had a detailed plan of what he would do as the coach. Like, I don't know. It just does seem like they're waiting for more at this point.
I think, speaking of timeline, I think we know, right? Like, if they're going to hire somebody else, there's no reason not to get it done in the next couple days.
Yeah, I mean, I think our buddy Fletcher Mackel's been floating out there. They should have gone for Zach Strief, which I kind of at one time thought that might not have been a bad move. I'm a big Zach Strief believer, but he wasn't even in the mix. I think they're probably distancing themselves from anybody that has anything to do with Sean Payton at this point.
Yeah. So I guess Kellen Moore's the guy, Rod. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I think so. I think if he wants the job, I think it's his job at this point. And especially if this goes on until, if they haven't announced Rizzi, Weaver, or Kafka by Friday and it goes on the next week, I think you have to think that it's just a matter of the clock hitting zero at the Super Bowl. You got to hope Kellen Moore doesn't lose the Super Bowl. So, what? I want to run it back. I got to get this.
I was going to say, could you imagine if he pulls out after all this?
That would be.
Something we didn't mention. I mean, the Saints have been either talked to or been linked to 8 candidates in this process. Half of them pulled out.
Well,
right?
Glenn took another job, right? And then the other three,
yes, but I mean,
he
could have prioritized this job.
Yeah. Right. Glenn took another job, but McCarthy, Brady, and Kingsbury have all said thanks, but no thanks. Maybe not just to the Saints, maybe to all jobs, but definitely at least to the Saints.
Yes.
And now they're left with these 4: Rizzi, Kafka, Weaver, and of course Kellen Moore. Who and that's a good point. Maybe we end there. Like, Kellen Moore has to say yes too. There's no guarantee just because the Saints are waiting on him that he has agreed on his end. I mean, that could be part of this.
Well,
too.
Here's the other thing we haven't talked about at all is money. I mean, that's a big thing here. It's a big part of these negotiations. Kellen Moore, Anthony Weaver, Kafka, they're going to be much less expensive than Mike McCarthy was going to be. Probably half of what Mike McCarthy would command. I'm sure Mike McCarthy was making over 10, I would assume, with Dallas. Whereas you're looking at probably 5 or 6 or something like that for any of these guys that are unproven. So that's something to think about with this organization. The Saints have never really paid any head coach top dollar except Sean Payton. He's the only one. And at this stage, I mean, I think it's also something that we have to consider. And Rod, you know this. I mean, the Pelicans are in complete kind of disarray right now too. The other team's not going very well. They may be looking at having to clean house in that other organization in the building that's going to be expensive. They're already paying, they had these assistant coaches that they've had contracts it's an expensive proposition. So don't underestimate how important a factor it is. They'll never say it publicly, but trust me, that's a big deal out there.
It's easy to see a scenario where Mike McCarthy, it wasn't that he just didn't want to be the Saints coach at all, but he had certain contract demands, whether it be pay, whether it be number of years, whether it be some sort of structural thing that he said, this is the circumstances under which I would take the job, and the Saints wouldn't do it, and so then they parted ways.
100%. I think is what happened. And I think he probably said, look, this is going to be a tough job. And for me, having come off this experience in Dallas, he has to make whatever head coaching job he gets next the right one, or he's never going to be a head coach again. So he knows that. And so he has to put, I'm sure, conditions, a long runway with the Saints, because this is not going to be a quick fix. I don't think anybody believes that. And I'm sure all those things factored into the discussions. Even though he didn't interview, trust me, his agent, Don Yee, I guarantee you, who has a very good relationship with Mickey Loomis going back. I mean, he was Sean Payton's agent. He's a high-profile agent. I guarantee you they've had discussions about parameters, conditions, and terms just to give them a vague starting point of where things stand.
Okay, I think that's going to do it for us. That kind of sets up where the situation is with the Saints head coaching search. I don't know if we'll be back with another podcast this week. If something changes, we will. Otherwise, we're going to see you next week. And speaking of that, the Saints Insider is going to be live from Radio Row at the Super Bowl all week next week. Aim is to go live every day, Monday through Friday, leading into the Super Bowl. Going to have a lot of different guests, some Saints-related, some not Saints-related, some Super Bowl-related. Have a lot of coverage for you of the big game here in New Orleans, and continued coverage, of course, of the Saints coaching search. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button, and tell your friends about the big week ahead next week. For our producer, Norman Bell, he's Jeff Duncan, Matthew Paris, and Rod Walker. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next time on the Saints Insider.